Justin Kinner, Kev Nash, Dayton's ESPN radio station, 1410 Wing AM. Kev, what time of the year is it?
List season.
We love list season. List season. Hey, if you scoot over to your right just a little bit, you'll be right there.
Hi, Mom.
Now we're off and rolling. Justin Kinner, Kev Nash, it's list season. And over the last couple of weeks, we have, of course, in our top 10 quarterbacks. What did we go with last week? I already forgot.
Wide receivers.
Wide receivers. So we have our top 10 quarterbacks, our top 10 wide receivers, all of that. Of course, if you want to go back, you can find right here on our ESPN Dayton YouTube channel. So make sure you take advantage of that. But today, Kev, top 10 running backs.
The undervalued position in the NFL, the running backs, the position nobody likes, but guess what? They're always like your first or second pick in the fantasy football draft.
So I'm always one to say, oh, yeah, the NFL is devaluing running backs and all this. I'm actually going to stop saying that. I don't think that people don't care about running backs. I don't think that the league doesn't care about running backs. I don't even think that the league is devaluing running backs. I think what we need to start doing is changing how we word that. I think they don't prioritize running backs. And the reason they don't prioritize running backs is because there's so many running backs. And it is sometimes some running backs have more value than others. But of all the production, of all the positions you can get out there, the run game is the easiest to replace production. You don't replace a Derrick Henry or a Nick Chubb, but you can replace their production, if that makes sense. I don't think that the league devalues running backs. However, I do think that they don't prioritize running backs, especially when it comes to the rising cost of paying wide receivers and paying quarterbacks. And now we're seeing D linemen get into the mix. So I just think it's a shift in all of that. But we are going to rank our top 10 NFL running backs. And we're going to start from number 10 to number 6. Okay. I'll go first to start today. Usually Kev goes first, but I'm feeling kind of froggy, so I'm leaping. I'm going first. Number 10. I can't believe I'm putting this individual in my top 10. Can't believe I have him at number 10. But the more I started taking time to sit back and dig into the numbers a little bit, Kev, I have Ezekiel Elliott as still a top 10 running back of the National Football League. This is a guy last year that everyone kept saying was, okay, he looks a step slower. He looks this, he looks that. I don't think Zeke is a top 5 running back. I think he's a top 10 running back. He had 850 yards last year in 15 games, and he was still averaging close to 80-plus yards a game. And keep in mind, doing all of that with splitting carries with Tony Pollard. Mm-hmm. If Tony Pollard is not there taking carries away from Zeke is probably a 1,200-yard running back. And with that, he's still a threat in the end zone, 12 touchdowns in 15 games. That's about as many touchdowns as some of the top backs in the league, like a Nick Chubb, like a Derrick Henry, like a Josh Jacobs, and so on and so on. I have Zeke Elliott at number 10. At number 9, it's a guy that I do think is kind of pushing back on the NFL's devaluing, although I think it's not prioritizing, deprioritizing the running backs. I have Austin Eckler coming in at number 9 on my list. I think that he is a difference maker. I think that the Chargers are doing everything in their power to try to kind of appease him while not being able to invest into him financially long-term because of the fact that they have to pay Justin Herbert coming up and some others. But I'm a big fan of Austin Eckler. Last year really did carry a lot of the load for the Chargers when you have no weapons in the pass game that Justin Herbert. I mean, there was a graphic of all the guys that Justin Herbert was throwing the ball to in the second half of the season. No one had ever heard of before, but it was the run game that was balancing out the pass game, and Austin Eckler was a weapon in more ways than none. Number 8, a guy that's moved up on my list over the last couple of years, especially once he's shown who he could be when he's healthy, Saquon Barkley. I go back to that 2018 draft. The Browns ended up getting Nick Chubb. I was like, I don't want that Nick Chubb. I want Saquon Barkley. You have a chance to get Baker Mayfield and Saquon Barkley, although I have to admit at the time it was for me, it wasn't Baker Mayfield at the time, but I wanted Saquon Barkley. I thought you could have had your cake and eat it too. The Browns ended up taking Baker 1 and then Denzel Ward with that number 4 pick, I believe.
Buckeye.
But Saquon Barkley, I mean, he is to the Giants what Nick Chubb has been to the Browns, what Derrick Henry has been to the Titans. Those teams do not even come remotely close to having the success that they have had if they don't have that guy. And that guy is Saquon Barkley. I have him at number 8. Number 7 is a guy that is looking for his next home, and that's Dalvin Cook.
DC4.
Dalvin Cook, number 7 on this list. And the reason I have him there is because his production has been as good as some of the top running backs in the league, all while playing in an offense that is predominantly about the pass with Justin Jefferson, obviously Adam Thielen over the last couple of years. And I say this because when I talk about Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, when we get to these guys coming up, they play in run-first offenses, so their numbers are inflated. The fact that Dalvin Cook in a pass-first offense, a balanced, to be fair, offense, the fact that his numbers are as good as they are is pretty impressive. I have him at number 7. And number 6, Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is the Colts offense, and I'm really curious to see what is going to happen. You know, he was an MVP candidate, or at least should have been in the conversation with the numbers that he put up. Exploded last year, kind of limited, of course, with injuries and stuff. I have him at number 6, but if we see a repeat season from 2 years ago from Jonathan Taylor, easily a top 5 running back in the league. But it takes a lot for a running back to be put into that MVP conversation. He wasn't there, but he was close, and I think that's good enough. But I have Jonathan Taylor at number 6. So from 10 through 6 for me, Zeke Elliott at 10, Austin Eckler at 9, Saquon Barkley at 8, Dalvin Cook 7, and Jonathan Taylor coming in at number 6. I'll have my top 5 in a moment, but let's hear from Kev Nash with his 10 through 6 in Kev Nash's top 10 NFL running backs list.
All right. We are taking it to the West Coast for number 10, the rookie running back, Kenneth Walker. You know, Shaw loves him because he tore up his beloved Michigan Wolverines when he was playing at Sparty for 1 year. Got shut down by the Buckeyes, though. Anyway, he rushed for over 1,000 yards with 9 touchdowns. He was really the engine to that team. I know that Geno played very well, but he was able to play well because that offensive line was able to open up holes for Kenneth Walker. So I got Kenneth Walker at number 10. At number 9 is very difficult spot for me because Miles Sanders, when he played with Philadelphia last year, he rushed for over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns. He was the engine to that run game. But they run so many different running backs with Philadelphia. Wasn't sure if he was even the best running back on the team. It just seemed like he got the most yards and the most attempts and everything like that. He's a free agent, ended up signing with the Carolina Panthers. So it's TBA about him. He's not going to be playing with that great offensive line and great offensive mind and all those weapons with Philadelphia. So that's why I got him down at number 9. At number 8, the guy with only 2 rushing touchdowns last season, which was crazy alarming when I looked at the stats. Aaron Jones, the running back from Green Bay. But if you look at how Green Bay was playing last year, they tried to air it out with Aaron Rodgers. That wasn't working because of whatever reason. Was it because Aaron Rodgers? Was it because of the young wide receivers? I'm going to blame it on the wide receivers for dropping multiple touchdown passes. So they went to the run game, and that's when Aaron Jones took off and he started balling. Once they got inside the red zone, they went to the other running back. But nonetheless, I got Aaron Jones at number 8. Number 7, probably going to be everybody looking at me all crazy, but I think this is the year that the wheels fall off for King Henry. Derrick Henry, over 1,500 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns, like you talked about when you were talking about it. He's in a run-first offense, so he gets more attempts than anybody out there. Kudos. But I think this is the year that, you know, with running backs, it's not a gradual decline like it is with wide receivers. When running backs fall off, they fall off the cliff. So I think this is the year that King Henry falls off the cliff, but I still got him coming in at number 7. At number 6, and looking at these numbers, I probably should have him higher, but Josh Jacobs, last year's number 1 leading rusher, over 1,600 rushing yards last year. That's 97 yards a game. He played in every single game last year. Caught for over 300 yards and an additional 12 touchdowns on the ground. So I got Josh Jacobs at 6, King Henry at 7, Aaron Jones at 8, Miles Sanders at 9, Kenneth Walker at 10.
All right, good stuff. Moving on again, continuing. That was Kev Nash and my top 10 NFL running backs, 10 through 6. And now it's time for 5 through 1. Number 5 on my list, Kev, is Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard fascinates me from a running back perspective, not because I'm a homer and a Dallas Cowboys fan, but he played 16 games last year. In 16 games, he had 193 carries. That is actually over 100 less carries than most of the guys in the top 10 total rushing yards last year. He rushed for 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. This isn't an offense that aired it out a lot, too. And you also had Zeke, who had 12 touchdowns on the ground last year and ran for 850 in 15 games. I think Tony Pollard now, with not playing alongside Zeke, and is going to get the majority of the carries. I think you're going to see him in the top 5 total rushing yards on the season. I think he's going to be exactly what the Cowboys need to balance out that pass game, which they've always had, don't get me wrong. But I think Tony Pollard, his numbers aren't a reflection of lack of production. It's actually, if you dig into the numbers and look what Zeke did alongside him, that's 2,000 yards, and we're talking about 20 touchdowns in the run game last year, split between those two. Tony Pollard is going to get more carries, more opportunities in the end zone. I see Tony Pollard being a huge breakout year last year, but I think an even bigger breakout year this year when it's all said and done.
Memphis running back. One of the crazy things about Tony Pollard is he played wide receiver in college.
Versatile.
That's insane, man. So shouts out to Tony Pollard.
Josh Jacobs, I have at number 4, who led the league in rushing yards last year, 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns. I like Josh Jacobs, and it's kind of one of those things where if the star power that's not in front of him, like not having him in the top 3 is kind of wild, but if you look at the names in front of him, it's not even a slight at him. That's just how low top heavy the top running backs are in the NFL right now. But I do have Josh Jacobs at number 4. He does another repeat of last year. I mean, now we're talking about that 1,600 yards range. That's what you're seeing from Derrick Henry. That's what you're seeing, of course, when healthy from Jonathan Taylor with the Colts. I mean, now we're talking about a different level. Let's see it one more time, especially in the transition year for the Raiders again, another new quarterback, and they're going to rely on him because who knows what's going to happen if he's even going to be healthy, talking about porn star Jimmy Garoppolo. So we'll see what happens. They are going to have to rely on Josh Jacobs a lot this upcoming season. This guy I've always been down on, and he made me a believer last year, and that's Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is a dude coming in at number 3 that is so versatile that when all the quarterbacks went out, he was the guy that everyone was looking at, like, can you dig us out of this situation? Obviously, that didn't happen. It shouldn't be up to him to kind of lead the passing game. But, man, he still was able to put the ball in the end zone and give the Niners a shot at one point where you thought, man, what if they do pull this off in that NFC Championship game last year? But Christian McCaffrey, when healthy, I mean, just the efficiency, the yards per carry, and his ability to get the ball in the end zone, and just a freak athlete. And he did it last year behind a really good offensive line, but he didn't play behind good offensive lines in Carolina and still put up freak numbers. This is consistency when healthy. He's a top 3 running back, and I think that's pretty dang cool. I have him at number 3. Number 2, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, for a lot of the same things you talked about, I keep waiting for that fall off, which is why everyone that thought that the Titans were crazy this year, when there was rumors floating around that they were potentially shopping Derrick Henry, now's the time you do shop Derrick Henry. You shop, you kind of see what you can get for him while his value is high. You don't want to wait to that first year where he barely passes maybe 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, and looks not as powerful, not as strong and fast as he has in years. Then you're not going to get as much back. Now would be the time, if you are Tennessee, who appears to be kind of in a mini rebuilding phase. I would have traded him, but nonetheless, I mean, 1,500 yards last year, 13 touchdowns, 10 big plays, which are bursts of 20 yards or more. He had 10 of those last year. I mean, he's unbelievable. And if you have him at number 1, which I know you don't, but for those watching and tuning in right now, he probably is the best running back in the NFL and probably should be number 1, and that's totally fine. But I have Nick Chubb at number 1, not because I'm a Browns fan. When you really dig into the numbers for Nick Chubb, here's what I love about Nick Chubb, Kev. Josh Jacobs led the league with 1,600 yards on 340 attempts on carries last year. Derrick Henry, 349 carries last year at 1,500 yards. Nick Chubb finished with just 100 yards less than Josh Jacobs' total yards on the season with 40 less carries. All right, and he had 47 less carries than Derrick Henry, who finished above him at about like 13 more total yards on the season. But again, just as efficient in the end zone. And the most impressive thing, Nick Chubb had more big run plays last year, and that's categorized as 20 yards or more. 13 big run plays last year, and then led the NFL in yards after contact. The yakety yak, I think that's more of the receiving thing, but
yeah,
he was.
No, that's real. That's real. That's a real stat.
So,
I'm a person that I like these stats that you try to come up with. That's a real stat. You get banged by a linebacker and you keep going for it. That's a real stat.
Yeah, because people try to hold that against Nick Chubb, that he plays with the best offense or a top 3 offensive line in football. So, of course, he's just eating up these yards.
So did Emmitt Smith.
That would make sense if, okay, when he is getting punched, he's not just dropping and falling to the ground in open field. You know, he's absorbing contact and continuing to move the chains. So Nick Chubb, again, a run-heavy offense, but at the same time, significantly less carries than guys who have total yards ahead of him, like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. I think that's pretty cool that his numbers are right up there with them. But again, the efficiency in the end zone, the yards after contact, and the fact that he had 13 plays of 20-yard bursts or more last year. My concern was in the second half of the season, he did slow down a bit, but they also transitioned into changing the offense up a bit with Deshaun Watson. I have him at number 1. I will not be surprised to see his numbers dwindle this year. It sounds like the Browns are going more pass heavy, as you should when you invest $230 fully guaranteed $1 million into a QB. But that's my top 10, Kev. Zeke Elliott at 10, Austin Eckler 9, Saquon Barkley 8, Dalvin Cook 7, Jonathan Taylor at number 6. My top 5, Tony Pollard at number 5, Josh Jacobs 4, Christian McCaffrey 3, Derrick Henry 2, and Nick Chubb as my number 1 running back in the NFL. Not because I'm a Browns fan, but maybe, who knows? All right, Kev, your top 5.
All right, top 5. We're going to take it out to the NYC with young Saquon Barkley finally got a full healthy year from Saquon Barkley. I know he's looking for a big time contract this off season, but right now going into the season, I got him coming in at the number 5 spot on the running back list. I mean, what can you say about Saquon Barkley? Outside of that playoff game, he was their offense, like catching, running. I was surprised they didn't have him returning kicks like they did at Penn State. He's an animal. Got Saquon at number 5. At number 4, going to stay with another Big Ten running back, Jonathan Taylor. Banged up last year, only played 11 games, still ran for over 800 yards. But like you were talking about the year before that, when he was putting up 16, almost 1,700 rushing yards, Jonathan Taylor is definitely that dude. Now it's time for my guy, DC4, Dalvin Cook. The reason I love Dalvin Cook so much is because he's super versatile. He brings those college big-time runs to the NFL. In the NFL, you do not see dudes break off 50, 60-yard runs. Well, with Dalvin Cook, you see him break off 75 and 80-yard runs, which is insane. So that's why I got Dalvin Cook coming in at the number 3 spot. At the number 2 spot, Nick Chubb, a very traditional power running back. You're not going to see him lining up in the slot, catching passes like a wide receiver, like a Dalvin Cook. But guess what? You can give it to him inside the tackles, and he's going to run dudes over. And he's also a guy that breaks off big-time runs. 1,500 rushing yards last year. Could have got a lot more. 12 touchdowns. Nick Chubb at number 2. But at number 1 for me, a guy that I've been loving since he was at Stanford. I love versatile running backs. I love dudes that you can line up anywhere on the field. You can tell by my list that those are the type of running backs that I like. I got Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey, since that trade from Carolina to San Francisco, you saw that offense go to the moon. Yeah, they had Deebo Samuels. Yeah, they had Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, they got Kittle. But what happened when he showed up? They started scoring 40 points a game in the NFL, which is insane because he's an additional weapon in the backfield as a running back. You could line up at slot. When they were down and didn't have any quarterbacks, they had him playing quarterback. I got Christian McCaffrey as the number 1 running back in the NFL.
I wanted him number 1. I don't know why. I held the injuries against him. If he's not injured the last couple of years, I have him at number 1. I thought it was a dumb trade when the Niners did that initially. I'm like, man, they gave up a lot. He's injury prone. And that was like the biggest trade. I don't think there was a bigger trade. I could be wrong, just talking off the top of our head right here, but I don't think there was a bigger trade that had more of an impact than that one. The Niners went from a very good team to a legitimate Super Bowl favorite, almost tied with the Eagles coming out. That's why those two teams were in the NFC Championship game. There's that. And you talk about Dalvin Cook. 81 yards. The longest run of the season was 86, and that was from Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs, yeah.
But you're right. Dalvin Cook leads. So I talked about those big plays, but there's only one guy that had 4 plays of 60 yards or more, and that was Dalvin Cook this season. Josh Jacobs, explosive.
Yes.
Nick Chubb had those 13 plays of 20 yards or more, but we're talking, I mean, those are power big plays. This guy is he's the finesse in the backfield, and he's a guy that complements the power backs like a Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, but no one's going to invest into that. That's for sure.
So, what was that game where they came back? The Vikings came back. They had a ton of comebacks last year. It was late in the year. It was like, I want to say, like on a Saturday or Thursday afternoon.
Was it the Lions? Did they beat the Lions?
I think it was the Lions. I think they were down like 35-7, and he had it wasn't even a screen. It was like a little dump off,
right,
and just gone, just gone.
That's not a play call. That's not that's you know what I mean. That's not a genius. Like
like I said before, man. You see that type of stuff on Friday nights, or on a Saturday. You don't see that in the NFL because of multiple reasons. There's a whole bunch of talent out there, and there's a whole bunch of fast dudes. But like the hash marks are so much closer, so you're always kind of like in between players. It's set up for teams to have to drive the length of the field. It's not set up for huge plays like that. And I mean, you're talking 60, 80, 70-yard plays is insane, man. And that speed that he has, that's why, like, even though obviously if he goes to Miami, it's going to hinder the team that I root for, the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I would love to see him in that offense. I actually would love to see him with the Dolphins, just as a fan, or even like with the Broncos, a one-cut running back. I get the ball, I make my cut, and there's lane, and I'm gone. So I think he ends up with the Dolphins, and I think he ends up with the Dolphins. He might be hoisting the Lombardi, man.
All right, Kenner and Cav, list season top 10 NFL running backs.